Hi, this is Kim Droptini. Welcome to episode 3 of Missionary Stories Abroad, and this is To the Streets of Berlin. As I said in the last episode, Berlin, we knew was a hard ground. My daughter had been there 3 years doing friendship evangelism, ministering with or talking to, giving of herself just day and night to like 100 different high school kids, and only one of them got saved. That was in a 3-year period. We talked to a pastor who had been ministering there 11 years and hardly any fruit. So as I came into Berlin, I knew it was a hard ground, and it wasn't really my style or my beliefs to do friendship evangelism. I just felt called to share the gospel straight up, straight out. But there was also a feel of any Christian in the city that you just don't do that in Berlin. That's not the best way to do it. It turns off the Germans. So anyway, I just knew it was hard. And I also thought, well, who are we? What are we going to do? So the only thing I thought was, hey, we need to just pray. So I saw me and my daughter, I just thought we would be in some prayer room, just praying and praying and praying before we actually did anything. But to my surprise, in those first 5 months, we were actually running with Jesus, and God just opened up doors. We had 3 different things going on at the same time. So it was quite a wonderful surprise. And I felt God did that for me, especially just to confirm that He indeed had sent me to Berlin, because even over the whole, I was there about 14 years, and that was the attack Satan gave me over and over and over was, you never, who do you think you are? Why did you come here? And you shouldn't be here. And you heard God wrong. Just accusation after accusation. But I believe that God gave us a fabulous beginning, just to let us know we had heard Him right. So, of course, the first thing we did was we met up with Arnold, the young man that we had met in the last episode. I told about we were living in Oxford, England, and we had taken a weekend trip to pray in Berlin, to just pray over any Christians we saw. And we met Arnold. And Arnold was evangelizing on the street. He sometimes had a friend, or he had maybe 4 people, but he was the leader. He was the pusher. He was the main instigator of this ministry that he started all by himself. So we knew that was one thing we knew. We'll meet with Arnold, and he had chosen a place in Berlin. It's a huge train station called Potsdamer Platz, and it's in a district of Berlin where there's theater, there's movie theaters. Now it wasn't there then, but now there's a huge mall there, and kind of but a nicer part of town. And he prayed about where did God want him to evangelize, and God led him to this place, he said, because his church used to be in that area before the Berlin Wall. And when the Berlin Wall went up, it pretty much split that church. Some were living in the former East, some were living in the former West. The church had to be relocated in the former East of Berlin, but he just felt that was a significant spot right there. And a lot of people said, "Why are you doing it here?" But it was a good spot because people were either passing us by to go to the train station or coming out of this train station. So looking right at us as they walked. So we had crowds coming both ways. And Arnold, um, he developed his ministry. He had met a man, I don't know how he met him, Jacob Bach, has now I think a worldwide ministry. It's called On the Red Box. And Arnold had gone to Spain, Madrid, Spain, where he learned about this ministry. And it's basically preaching the gospel. And there was a certain way that you would do it. You always had to have a prop, something to show. You had to really bring out the gospel, bring out that the law is written on our hearts, as it says in the Bible, and bring out the fact that we're all sinners in need of God, and then the wonderful plan of God to send Jesus to take the atonement, the punishment for our sins. So then we were to weave that into a story, weave the gospel into a story with our prop. And it was kind of hard for me, I have to admit. I'd never street preached before. My daughter had never street preached before. And but we started doing it with Arnold, and because it was a little bit out of my comfort zone, I asked Arnold, could we hold up free prayer signs? And he said, sure, why not? So we did that as well. And he was so amazing. He even made his own tracks. He had they were like postcards, and they had a picture on one side, and he had a picture of one of the Berlin Wall when it was up, and then on the other side it talked about the walls in our lives and God tearing the wall down. But he had many tracks, so we passed out hundreds of tracks. We met there every Friday night. I'm trying to think how far it was from our home. Maybe we rode our bikes every Friday night, and I think maybe a 5-mile bike ride. I don't know, but I have good memories whizzing through Berlin to get to Potsdamer Platz. And what happened is, I believe this was God. It was just an amazing thing. As I said, when we started, it was all we knew was Arnold and just a few people from his church helping him. But then I don't know if it happened immediately, but we met a man from Texas. His name was Jeff Serio, and God had sent him to Berlin to start a ministry of bringing teams from the United States into Berlin to share the gospel. And God gave him a picture of the Berlin airlift, where Americans dropped food into Berlin after World War II. And he had a picture of God just dropping in Americans. So we met him on one of those Friday nights. And then we met a man named Chuck Magnet and his wife Della, who had just come at the direction of the Lord. And they were living in kind of a big old mansion with another couple. So we met them. And in the end, each one of us, from that beginning, Jeff started European Initiative. We started a ministry called To the Streets, and Chuck Magnet started a ministry of praise and worship, working with the Burn. And so anyway, but that was our humble beginnings every Friday night, evangelizing at that square. And we also met a young girl from our home state. Her name was Rachel. She was from Tacoma, Washington. And she ended up moving in with us like maybe a year later. She moved into our apartment with us. And now we're all back in Oregon. She's back in Tacoma. We're here in Klamath Falls, Oregon. But just amazing. And then we met a man named Pascal, and he was from Nigeria. And he spoke great English, did not speak English. And he had been praying for somebody who spoke German that he could preach the gospel and they would translate. So we got to know Pascal. We got to know another young man from Albania, and his name was Nari. And when he was a young boy, he had stepped on a landmine and had his arm and half of his body. He lost his leg, he lost his eye and use of an arm. And his testimony of coming to know Jesus from a non-Christian family was just amazing. And he would get up and share his testimony, and the crowds would come when Nari shared. So we just became a beloved team. Sadly, that only lasted about a year, going every Friday night to Potsdamer Platz, because our wonderful leader, Arnold, who was a wonderful leader, felt called to move to Spain. to work with Jacob Bach, which he's still there. He married there, he has kids there, and but we had an amazing, amazing year. Um, and so I just wanted to tell one. I mean, I was shocked. I have my diaries from that time, and I only remember a few things. And when I read my diaries, I'm just shocked at different things that happened, amazing things that God opened up doors. And these are maybe not that amazing stories I'm going to share, but I just found two just as an examples to share. When we first moved to Berlin, of course, we had nothing. We didn't have any furniture, and we moved into an apartment building. And I don't know if I said this in the last episode, but behind, in the same building, a church met, and in the front of the building at the bottom was a cafe. And they were looking for somebody to to use the cafe as an outreach. And me and Bree said, "Here we are." But that church took us on. The pastor sent an email out. We've got two young women here. We've got a mother daughter here. I think I'm a young woman. We've got a mother daughter here from America. They need furniture. The church just donated things. And then we kept our car that we had driven from England long enough to just kind of get around. It was falling apart. It's amazing it lasted. But I remember we drove way across Berlin. We had found a bed, I think on Craigslist for me. And when we got to the home to pick it up, it was a missionary family. They were leaving and they were getting rid of their furniture. And so I bought my bed from a missionary family. But they were associated with another missionary that was in another part of Berlin, a part where there's a lot of Turkish people, and so a lot of Muslims. And he was on a bridge passing out um, literature in the Turkish language and the Arabic language. Um, and I didn't know that at the time. Not long after I bought the bed, we happened to go to that area and saw him and talked to him. And I said, "Oh, do you mind? We're evangelizing now at Potsdamer Platz. Can I have a couple of your Arabic Bibles?" And he gladly gave them to us. So on one of the nights at Potsdamer Platz, I was preaching. And like I said, when we preached, we always had a prop, and I found these handcuffs. So I had the handcuffs on, and I was preaching about being in chains and just the chains of sin, the chains of drug addiction, the chains of, it could be anything, loneliness or fear, but I told my story of how Jesus came and broke my chains. And then I was able to free myself from those handcuffs. And sometimes after we got done preaching, we would say, if you want to talk to us, raise your hand. And a man raised his hand, and I went over to talk to him, and he was a Muslim. And literally just the week before I'd gotten those Bibles. And we had just an amazing, he was so open, and he was eager to take that Bible and read it. Sadly, I never saw him again, but it was just a really cool, exciting thing. And then another time, I'm just going to say one for my daughter. She was preaching, and there was an alcoholic man. There's a lot of street people in any big city, I think, and Berlin had a lot of people just out on the streets. And not, yeah, I'll go into that later. But anyway, he was an alcoholic, and he told Breanna after she got done preaching, he said, "I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't help it. I felt compelled to listen to you." And they really talked to him. They prayed for him. And Breanna said the minute she started praying for him, God gave her a word. And the Lord said, he has no father. He didn't have a father. His father rejected him. And so Breanna told him that. And he said, "How did you know?" And he said, "I've never had anything like this happen to me before." And he said, "I'm going to be back. I'm coming back next week to hear you again." So those were the kinds of things that were happening. And mind you, like I think I shared this last week, but communism had done its job of creating a whole city of nation of atheists. They were true. It was like 98% of these people were atheists. They were convinced there is no God. So to have us come preaching about a God, it was novel. It was something new, and they had a lot of arguments. So to have any kind of open was quite amazing. So that was something we did. And then we just felt that God was saying, okay, I put you in this neighborhood where your apartment is. It was called Friedrichshain, and it was in the former East where the wall had been up. And where we lived, um, when the Berlin Wall fell, people thought it would come back up, and they ran from the east into the west. Many of them just left and never came back. And as a result, whole buildings were vacant. And then squatters came in and squatted them. And so we lived in a neighborhood that was like this, graffiti all over. And anyway, and also in our neighborhood is a park, or was a park, called Boxhagner Park. And every Wednesday there was a flea market there. I mean, wait, on Wednesdays there was a market, like with food, with cheese, with fish, bread. And then every Saturday was a huge flea market. And it was kind of famous. It's not a huge park, and so it was kind of quaint and nice. And then the rest of the week at this park, um, alcoholics and drug addicts kind of lived there. And then there was also a play area park. And so young families might be there, everybody kind of coexisting. It felt like stepping back in the 60s in America, just like a lot of hippie type people. And anyway, we were really praying about, we wanted to minister in our neighborhood. We felt God put us there for a reason. Where should we minister? And we felt God said, do it at Boxhagner Park. And so we told Arnold, the leader of our street preaching on Friday night, and he said, ooh, I know of that place. That's really dangerous. Maybe you shouldn't go in there alone. And so we said, come there and pray with us. So we went there and prayer walked with Arnold, and we could see obvious drug addicts and alcoholics hanging out there. But I felt God said, I've already prepared the ground. Go in. Arnold recommended we spend months praying, but I just felt we should go. We should go. And so Pascal, this young man from Nigeria, that we met at Potsdamer Platz, wanted to go with us. He wanted to preach there and then have Breanna translate. So we went in there, and before he came, I think he was late or he had to go do something. So at the beginning, I think it was just my daughter and I. So we went in, and we were a little afraid because of what Arnold had said. And we sat on a bench, and there was a group of people in the middle of the park sitting in a circle, like passing a joint around. Then we have, and the park had a fence all around it. Outside of the fence was a walkway and then trees. And just outside of the fence, we observed one of the men, and he was in a huge fight with a girl, and they were screaming at each other. Sounded like it was like his ex-girlfriend, and then he kicked her right in the stomach. It was just horrifying, just horrible to see this violence. So we're sitting there watching that. And then out of this circle of people, all of a sudden, one of them stood up and started. It was a man. He was very dark skinned, and he had long hair and jewelry and brightly colored clothes. And he kind of shuffled to us and introduced himself. And he said, we told him who we were. We were Christians. And he said he was a pilgrim, and that it was hard to understand him. We found out he was from Venezuela. And so he spoke real broken German and no English. So my daughter had to interpret and kind of try to understand his limited German. But anyway, he sat down with us, and he said, I know all the people in this park and they need Jesus. And so we prayed for him. We shared the gospel with him. We laid hands on him. And it was a miracle. It was as if we watched him being reborn right before our eyes. And he just the joy that came over him. And later that day, we were praying for someone else, and he came up and he goes, pray for me again. And I don't know why we felt led to just pray that he'd be filled with the Holy Spirit. So we laid hands on him and prayed for him again, and he started speaking in tongues. And so it was just, again, that was our beginning of launching out on our own. And we had that happen. And later Pascal, our friend, came back. They preached. We had people heckling us, but we had people listening. And Pascal, and he had a friend named Anthony, also from Nigeria, and both of them led someone to the Lord that very day. And so, yes, we just felt really excited to begin this ministry in the park. And the man from Venezuela, just to tell the end of that story, over the years, we watched him. We watched him grow. We watched him change bit by bit. It didn't happen overnight, but he was like, became an evangelist. When he saw us, he would come and go, give me some tracts. And he would go around the park passing them out, or he would bring people to us. And over time, we had teams come and join us on the streets in Berlin. And he joined our outreaches. And so then I remember years later, we would go to a church, and there he was, and he would kind of church hop and go to different churches all over Berlin, but he stayed committed. And he used to come and worship with us. And so we didn't always see that. We might see someone come to the Lord, maybe never see them again, or it was seldom that we got to see the fruit of our work. But with Luis, we did, which was amazing. So that was Boxy. And another story I just wanted to tell that just stands out in my mind is at the beginning, we felt like God said, take food in. Take in chocolate chip cookies and pass them out. Take in homemade bread, banana bread, and pass it out. So we did that from the very beginning. We always had food with us. And after maybe the third or fourth time, I think once those people knew that we were Christians and what we were doing, just the enemy within rose up. And I remember we offered some food and they knocked it out of our hands, and they just started becoming pretty hostile towards us. We never did go in without always having pre-prayer, just a lot of prayer. But anyway, we came in one day, and we always would walk around the park and pray before we went in as well. And me and Breanna and Pascal were just walking around, just privately praying. And then we came back to meet. And each one of us, I said, when I was praying, felt like something told me they're going to try and beat us up today. And then my daughter said, I heard or felt the same thing. And Pascal said, I heard the same thing. And I don't know to this day if, God was warning us or if the enemy was trying to get us to not go. And I think that is what it was. I think it was just the enemy's voice. And we had heard a story. His name's Arthur. What is it? Blessed, I think. And he carried a cross starting in the 60s and up until the 90s. He carried a cross all over the world. And so Arthur Blessed, I think that's his name. We had heard about him. And when he had people come at him or attack him, he had determined from the beginning of his ministry not to fight back. But what he would do was just kneel down in a submissive, position, let them beat him up. He wasn't going to fight back. And obviously trust in Jesus for protection. So we discussed that with Pascal. We said, you know what? We're not going to let this stop us. If they beat us up, beat us up. We are going to go in. So with trembling, and there was also one side of the park that had a toilet area. and they went in there, they would use in there, and it was kind of stinky and dirty, and so that side of the park just felt extra dark, because the very opposite was the children's playground, and this was opposite that. And but that's where a lot of the men we wanted to reach, that's where they were. So we just boldly walked up to them. And the man that had knocked the food out of my daughter, he took it. He took some food for the first time. He thanked us. We did, and it was like, wow, the opposite happened. Those men, for whatever reason, opened their hearts to us, welcomed us. And from that time on, it was as if we owned the park. Um, Months later, we were preaching once, and somebody tried to stop us and came over to physically stop us. And one of the regular park guys, he came stomping out and he said, "You don't touch them. They can preach. They're allowed to do it here." And so they even protected us. And so that was just one of the beginnings. And then the other thing I just want to share that is so cool. Then, so the three I told you about that we met at Potsdamer Platz, we met Jeff Sirio and Chuck, one from North Carolina, one from Texas, and us. We all came to Berlin, not the same year, but within the same 2 or 3 years. Interesting that we all came to Berlin, that we all randomly met preaching on the street at Potsdamer Platz with Arnold. But Jeff, while this is happening, he's starting his own ministry. And he had his first team come from Texas. And so one of those teams came with us to Boxhagner Park, and they just saturated the park with the love of Jesus, with the gospel. And then Chuck, the other one that started the worship eventually, he came in with us. So it was as if, without our even trying and knowing, God gave us people. God gave us teams. We were rarely alone going into Boxhagner Park, which I never would have dreamed. And then just the third wave, or the third thing I'll briefly touch on that was happening was, so the cafe. We had this little cafe that was in our building, and we were allowed to do kind of what we wanted. So we just wanted to have it open. We wanted to have some food, just hope that people would come in. And so we had to fix it. We had to get it ready. We had to clean it. We just set an opening date to open that cafe. And I was looking in my journal, and I would have completely forgotten that this had happened. But on the opening of the cafe, which was July 12th, I wrote, "We had warfare in our house today," so that we were going to open it that night. And first, I had this beautiful blue vase that I had brought from Oxford, England, and it was in my window, and somehow the wind blew, the door of the window crashed, my vase broke all over. I mean, that if that was just it, that would have been nothing, but it was sad because it was a beloved vase. Then I made some banana crunch cake for that cafe that night. It was baking in the oven, and somehow, I don't know how, the oven caught on fire, burnt the cake. And the fire was so bad, it came out and burnt the knobs of the oven. And my daughter had to help me. We didn't know if we'd even get that fire out. We got it out, but so that happened. Then our roommate Rachel, that lived with us, she had pottery that was somehow on the I don't know how it happened, but it was in the kitchen. She had this blue pottery pot. It fell and broke. Then we, in our washer, the valve broke on we were running wash, and our bathroom flooded with water. So all this happened in one day in our apartment, but we just felt, I just wanted to share that. That's kind of a picture of our life in Berlin. It was as if we had disaster, we had trauma, and then we'd have breakthrough. Disaster, trauma, breakthrough. But anyway, the breakthrough was that night we opened the cafe. We had somebody from the park that we had met that was walking down the street. He came in. Some neighbors came. The other cool thing, God used us. We had a neighbor, a young man living in the building, and he had been involved in some satanic things. And his name was Steve. And we were able to meet with him, pray for him for deliverance. He was filled with the Spirit, and he joined us quite regularly, evangelizing as well. So that was another thing. So we had this cafe going, we had Potsdamer Platz going, we had Boxogner Park going, and we were just running. To my shock, we weren't huddled in a prayer room. Um, we just were going. And so, yes, I have lots more stories I'm eager to share with you. And so, this is all the time I have. So, this is the end of episode 3. And I sure thank you for listening. And let's all get out there. I pray, God, please, it's hard to evangelize in the small city where I live. I'm trying, but my heart's cry is till all have heard. And we want to just, it's our call. He's called us to go into all the world, wherever we are, and preach the gospel. So I just hope to encourage you to preach the gospel, to be aware, to think about it. This is our call as Christians. And so thank you for listening. God bless you.